Summary. Hunter's illness is progressing to its later stages. Chapter 18, The Leg. Exiting through the pipe, Survivor stumbles into the next room. The gate stands imposingly in front of him, and Glimmer squeaks in fear. He pats her comfortingly. "You've never seen a decontamination gate before, have you?" He says this quietly before sniffling, still feeling a bit overwhelmed by what happened just a room behind him. "Don't worry, Glimmer. It's perfectly safe, I assure you." Survivor takes a seat on the ground, leaning against the nearest wall. Glimmer chirps, nuzzling into the side of his neck, her whiskers tickling him as he giggles. With a sigh, he leans back, resting his head against the wall and looking up at the cracked ceiling. Another tear runs down his cheek as he sniffles again. Survivor knew he was just overreacting, just like he did when Hunter killed that other scavenger a few cycles ago. Scavengers could be befriended, sure, but one could also very easily be perceived as a threat and eliminated by them. He didn't judge Artificer for killing the scavengers, considering her reputation with them. Trying to casually pass through peacefully would have definitely ended in violence anyway. But Artificer obviously didn't kill them because she saw it as necessary, she killed them because she wanted to. Glimmer chirped sadly as Survivor whimpered, recalling the moment he and Hunter heard the first of many explosions. It had quickly been followed by the dead body of an orange scavenger landing in front of them, its fur practically completely burned off its body. But it was nothing in comparison to the scene at the top of the wall, the scorch marks and blood on the ground, the blue scavenger's mauled body, and the dark brown scavenger, whose body was completely broken but nonetheless was still alive, if only barely. He shuddered as he remembered Artificer's expression of righteous fury, hefting the spear above her head, ready to strike the finishing blow. Survivor tried to reassure himself that it was fine because the scavengers came back anyway, alive and well, next cycle. It didn't help because they had still died gruesomely, and Survivor knew well from experience that the memory of the death suffered doesn't just go away when you come back. He curled up, hugging his knees closer to his body. They stay with you forever. If he thought hard, he could still recall some of his worst deaths. What makes the scavengers' experiences any different? Survivor was starting to understand why Monk had sworn off violence completely, engaging in a dangerous, pacifistic approach to survival. Total refusal to significantly harm any creatures, even in self-defense. He would eat the spoils of a hunt if he was hungry enough, but only if someone else had hunted and killed it. Just as he was about to start crying again, this time over his innocent little brother, Hunter popped out of the pipe in front of him with a yelp, landing on the ground in a heap. He got to his feet quickly, looking frustrated as he brushed himself off. "Well, that was rude." Hunter's eyes fell on Survivor, and his expression softened into one of concern. "Are you all right?" he asked as he quickly walked over, kneeled in front of him, and carefully took hold of his face with his free paw. The white slugcat purred and leaned into his mate's gentle touch, feeling his former melancholy fade away into nothing. Glimmer helped by doing much of the same, gently head-butting the side of his head. "I am now," he responded, and Hunter smiled in response, looking relieved, before standing up and offering a paw to the sitting slugcat. Accepting the offered paw, the sitting slugcat was immediately pulled to his feet and into a hug. They relaxed in each other's embrace for a moment before Survivor noticed Hunter was shivering. "How about you?" he asked, pulling out of the hug to look Hunter over. The energy his mate seemed to have gotten from the killed bird was wearing off as he swayed slightly on unsteady feet, his eyes looking tired and unfocused. "Feeling a bit tired," Hunter responded after a moment, blinking slowly. Before Survivor could respond, Artificer popped out of the pipe, taking a glance around the room before walking over to the others. She looked Survivor over briefly, humming thoughtfully. After a moment, she nodded to herself before turning to Hunter, her eyes widening slightly. "Hunter, are you all right?" she asked, her normally neutral expression worried as she looked the red slugcat over for any injuries. "I just need to rest." Hunter's speech was almost slurring as he mumbled the words. It didn't do much to comfort Artificer or Survivor. "Let's find a shelter quickly," Survivor said with urgency in his voice as he wrapped an arm around Hunter's shoulders to support him. Artificer's expression turned serious as she nodded, and Glimmer seemed to realize the severity of the situation as well, passing over to Hunter by using Survivor's arm as a bridge and wrapping herself around Hunter's neck. The red slug cat purred quietly, carefully reaching an arm up and petting the fur on the mouse's head. Once the group had stepped into position, the gate closed their entrance before beginning the decontamination process. Hearing mumbling, Survivor looked over to see Artificer looking around, a baffled expression on her face. Unbelievable, completely unbelievable. He overheard her saying it, along with a long string of angry expletives. Told ya so. Hunter mumbled and chuckled lowly, glancing over at the frustrated slug cat, who blared back in turn. Survivor was incredibly confused, glancing back and forth between the two, one looking unbelievable smug, despite his current condition, and the other crossing her arms and turning away with a scoff. At his mate's confused expression, Hunter reached over and patted Survivor's paw that was resting on his shoulder. "I'll explain later," he whispered, casting another smug look at Artificer, who stuck her tongue out in response. Eventually the gate finished its process and opened up, allowing the group to make for the duct leading into the new region. Everyone took a moment to glance around. They were in a tall room with a very deep pit in front of their feet, a very tall ceiling with a lot of different suspended platforms, and a lot of poles to climb up. Survivor felt his head spin as he looked up. The sheer height they would undoubtedly have to climb made him feel nauseous. "Shelter, ahead." Hunter groaned, wincing in pain, as he tried to point across the gap with his paw. Survivor gulped. Getting to that shelter would most definitely require some climbing up the poles around them. There was no way he or Hunter could make that jump. "Here, hand him over," Artificer suddenly said, stepping up to the edge. "I can carry you guys over with an explosive jump, that's the fastest way," she added, reaching towards Hunter. He handed over his mate with a slight hesitation, Glimmer swapping shoulders with Survivor's. Of course he trusted Artificer's abilities, but it didn't stop him from feeling a bit nervous. The maroon slug cat seemed to notice this, sending a warm smile his way. "Don't worry, I've done this before," she said it confidently, holding onto Hunter tightly and crouching down slightly. "Hold on tight, okay?" Hunter grunted an affirmation, his grip on Artificer tightening. After a small moment of gauging the distance, Artificer jumped, exploded, and was propelled through the air, with Hunter being pulled along. Survivor released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding as the two slug cats landed on the other side, Artificer sending a quick thumbs up his way as his mate let go of Artificer and sat down, dazed. "All right, you two." She jumped across the gap again, landing in front of them. "Your turn, grab on." Both Survivor and Glimmer shared a nervous glance before Survivor grabbed onto Artificer while the mouse on his shoulder wrapped its arms around his head. With a deep breath, she jumped as far as she could. Survivor felt his breath leave him as they flew. Glimmer chirped in fear before any other noises were drowned out by a loud bang. They spun through the air, the two passengers unable to figure out whether they were upside down or right side up as their pilot backflipped towards their destination. As soon as his paws hit solid ground, he let go of Artificer and sat down on the ground next to Hunter. Glimmer followed their example, sitting down to recover from the ordeal. "Takes a bit getting used to," Artificer said, shrugging before turning around and peering over the edge of the pit they just jumped over. Glimmer sniffed the air and suddenly perked up, looking upward towards the ceiling. Survivor tilted his head before following her gaze. There, on the bottom of one of the suspended platforms, hung a few blue fruits. The little mouse chirped happily, got to its feet, and started to climb towards the food. "No, Glimmer." He stood up to chase his pet down when Artificer held out an arm, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't worry, I'll catch the little bugger," she assured him, jumping onto the pole and climbing after Glimmer. "Get Hunter in the shelter, I'll join you shortly," she yelled downward before explosively jumping further up. Survivor thought that plan made the most sense, bending down to help Hunter get to his feet. He groaned as he stood, coughing a few times and shivering, hunching over in pain. He gently guided his sick mate into the shelter, helping him crawl through the pipe, before swiftly following close behind. Once they were inside, Hunter immediately collapsed on the floor, wheezing heavily and whimpering in pain. Survivor wasted no time in comforting him, joining him on the floor and cuddling as close as physically possible, licking the red slug cat in the back of his head. Hunter's whimpering and shivering diminished slowly but surely, until he was lying completely still and silent on the floor. The complete silence worried Survivor for a moment, but then he heard soft snoring coming from Hunter, and he relaxed. The entrance to the shelter suddenly lit up blue, and after a moment, Glimmer jumped in, a blue fruit in her jaws. She moseyed over to the two slug cats, curling up on Survivor's other side as she ate the fruit. Artificer popped through next, holding one blue fruit in her previously empty paw and another in her mouth. She dropped the blue fruits next to Glimmer, who chirped happily. "Your little pet sure has an appetite, that's her fifth fruit, and she's showing no signs of stopping," Artificer said, puffing in amusement. "Thanks for helping catch and feed her, Artificer," Survivor responded, genuinely thankful for her help. Artificer waved him off before walking over to a corner and settling down, placing the spear she was carrying on the floor next to her. Survivor didn't really feel all that tired, but staying up all night was boring and would make him exhausted for when they needed to make progress, so with a sigh, he curled closer to his mate and closed his eyes. "Night, Artificer," he mumbled, trying to fall asleep but finding it very difficult. "Night, kid," Artificer responded as a shifting was heard from the corner. Survivor spent what felt like at least an extra cycle trying to fall asleep, constantly shifting around and changing sleeping positions. He didn't understand why sleep wouldn't come. His guess was that he was simply not tired at all. With a quiet groan, he eventually gave up, opening his eyes and opting to just stare at one of the shelter walls until he got tired. "No. Stop." Survivor's ears twitched as he heard mumbling in the quiet shelter. He looked towards the source, seeing Artificer tossing and turning in her sleep, mumbling to herself as she whimpered and keened quietly. "Please, not again." Survivor felt his ears flatten against his head. She was having a nightmare. It was a really bad one, judging by her reactions. He himself had to deal with many bad dreams when he was separated from his colony for the first few cycles, usually dreams about how they decided to simply leave, not even bothering to look for him. The worst one had been about Monk, looking down at him as he hung off a ledge, dangling over a deep pit. Survivor would call out for his little brother to help him, to pull him up, but Monk would just stand there, wearing a sadistic grin, as he watched his brother slowly lose his grip and fall into the abyss. Survivor shuddered to himself. At least he knew that one was a nightmare, but there had been some dreams that had felt so realistic that he just wasn't sure. He was just considering crawling over to wake Artificer up when she suddenly sat up with a gasp. In a moment of panic, he made the decision to simply close his eyes and pretend to be asleep. Artificer spent a few moments trying to calm her rapid breathing. Once she did, she whimpered and made a choked sound of pain. This was followed by intense but quiet sobbing. It continued for a short while before eventually dying down to complete silence. Survivor cracked his eyes open, seeing Artificer with her back turned and her body still shaking with quiet sobs. He resisted the urge to whine in sympathy, instead closing his eyes and once again trying to fall asleep. Something told him that if he let her know he'd heard her nightmare and breakdown, she'd clamp up and not want to talk about it. He needed to let her come to him and talk about it when she was ready. Something like that. Survivor sighed, wishing Monk was here. He was really good at understanding and comforting people, sometimes acting way more emotionally mature than Survivor, despite being the younger brother. Finally, Survivor started to succumb to sleep, thinking of him and Monk reuniting and catching up, sharing stories of all the dangers they both went through to finally reach each other once again. With a smile on his face, he finally dozed off. Hunter flinched as he was shaken awake, the movement generating more waves of pain from the enlarged lump on his back. "Sorry." Hunter heard Survivor say it through his own pained hiss. "It's fine," he responded by painfully slowly standing up. "I think it's getting even worse," he whispered, his head spinning violently as he stumbled. Before he could fall over, two pairs of arms caught him before carefully lowering him to the ground. The world kept spinning as Hunter felt nausea settle deep in his stomach. His head hurt, his arms hurt, and his legs hurt. Fuck, everything hurts. He could vaguely hear Survivor and Artificer talking to each other as he zoned out, his eyes losing focus as his mind wandered. Hunter could practically feel the roots of the cyst in his back spreading through the rest of his body. They were writhing inside him, pushing against his skin. Was he hallucinating, or were they really there, trying to reach out from inside him, pushing through his flesh like tentacles? His mouth felt weird, and he felt like throwing up. Need, outside. He mumbled, trying to avoid talking as much as possible. The other two stopped talking and crouched down to help him. Survivor sat at his side, his paw running through the fur on his back, the parts that were free from infection. Artificer sat in front of him, putting a paw on his shoulder. "What was that, Hunter?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft and worried. "I'm feeling." Hunter started. He tried to get more words out but felt his stomach scream in protest. Artificer's face flashed with realization as she picked Hunter up. He could vaguely hear her telling Glimmer and Survivor to follow her. Once they were outside the shelter, she placed him on the ground. As soon as his head tilted downward, his insides flipped inside out. Hunter heaved and coughed into the ground, clutching one of his paws at his aching stomach. Artificer rubbed comforting circles into his back, and he felt Glimmer curling around his leg. His mate sat at his other side, whispering reassurances and comforting words. When his stomach had emptied, he whimpered and leaned back. "It's spreading inside of me," Hunter rasped, his voice sounding alien through his torn throat. "I'm a lost cause." He mumbled as arms wrapped around him, lifting him into the air. "You have to leave me." He felt his face press into rough but warm fur. Something was wrapping around his back, pulling taut. Instinctively, he snuggled into the fur as he shivered. "It's so cold. Why is it so cold?" Someone was speaking, but he couldn't hear a word and couldn't see either when he tried to look around. Slight vibrations of movement were felt as he bounced rhythmically up and down. Hunter shuddered as the lump on his back pulsed, matching his heartbeat. "It's already connected to my heart, I know it. I'm doomed." His blurry vision darkened as he felt his consciousness start to fail him. "I'm doomed." "Hold on, Hunter, please just hold on," Survivor whispered as he ran. The Overseer pointed this way. "Come on," Artificer yelled, slightly ahead of him. His mate, strapped to Artificer's back with vines they pulled from a wall, was completely limp. The only thing that stopped Survivor from completely freaking out was the sight of Hunter's chest slowly rising and falling as a weak wheeze rattled from his chest. They jumped through a pipe, ending up on the outside. There were a bunch of green sparks flying all around them, and machinery whirring could be heard all throughout the area. Glancing up, Survivor noted there was more climbing up poles to be had, this time on outsticking platforms up the side of the can. Hunter coughed again, twitching on Artificer's back for a moment before stilling and groaning weakly. Survivor could see the cyst on Hunter's back beating like a heart as his mate shuddered. "It's only getting worse. What do we do?" he asked, panicking as he tried to comfort Hunter with a pat on the head. It seemed to be working as a distraction, at least, as Hunter stopped shuddering and leaned into Survivor's hand while chirping weakly. "We need to get him something to eat," Artificer growled, looking for predators in their surroundings. "Anytime his stomach's full, it seems to be able to fight off the illness, at least for a bit. It's our best bet," she exclaimed, turning to Survivor. He nodded in response, and they were off, climbing up the poles in search of anything to hunt. Luckily, they didn't have to look too far. As they both climbed onto the next platform, a hiss was heard behind them. Before Survivor had a chance to whip around, a black tongue shot out of the darkness behind him, wrapping itself around his arm. "What?" he yelped, trying to pull his arm out of the grip, but it was too strong, and Survivor was slowly getting pulled in the source of the tongue's direction. Glimmer, who was seated on his shoulder, squeaked fearfully. Before hissing in anger, lunging at the tongue, and biting down on the soft appendage. Turning to the threat, Survivor finally noticed the white lizard standing a few meters away. Artificer snarled, dashing towards the lizard. As she got closer, the lizard finally decided to release Survivor's arm, deciding to prioritize the closest prey. Just before the lizard could clamp down on her, However, Artificer suddenly crouched down and generated a discombobulating explosion. The lizard was dazed and temporarily blinded as it swung its head around in a panic. The maroon slugcat hissed and took the opportunity, jabbing her spear just below its armored head and piercing it through the throat. The lizard twitched once, twice, then fell completely limp. She pulled out the spear as Survivor walked over with Glimmer in his arms, both of them shaking with adrenaline. "Thanks for the save." Artificer turned around and nodded in response. "Of course," she said, before carefully untying the knots keeping Hunter to her back. Once he was freed, she carefully lowered him to the ground. He wasn't unconscious anymore, but he seemed barely aware of where he was or what was happening. As Artificer turned to the corpse, using her spear to carve a few pieces of meat off the carcass, Survivor sat down in front of Hunter. "Hey, Hunter. How are you holding up?" Survivor asked, carefully placing his paw on his mate's shoulder. As soon as he makes contact, Hunter whines loudly and grabs hold of Survivor's paw with both of his own. His foggy and glassy eyes locked with Survivor's. "Survivor? Is that you?" he asked, his voice scared and quiet, glancing around as if not seeing the slugcat right in front of him. "Yeah, Hunter. It's me, I'm here." Survivor reassured, grabbing hold of both of Hunter's paws and squeezing. I think I'm dying, Survivor." Hunter's voice dropped to a whisper, and his eyes suddenly stopped glancing around and instead locked onto Survivor's. "I think this is it," he whimpered, tightening his hold on Survivor's paws. "I don't want to die." "You're not going to die." Artificer suddenly appeared, kneeling next to Hunter as the red slugcat flinched and turned his head towards her. "Here, eat this." She held a piece of the lizard towards him, and he flinched back, scrunching his nose. "Don't be a baby, it's lizard meat." Artificer groaned, holding it out towards him. Hunter carefully leaned in and sniffed at the meat before carefully taking it from her paws and slowly nibbling on it. Artificer picked up her own piece of meat and started taking bites. Survivor felt something brush against him and looked down to see Glimmer gesturing towards a small pile of blue fruits that had suddenly appeared next to him. "Did you collect these?" he asked the mouse, amazed. Glimmer chirped happily in response, and Survivor laughed, scratching the mouse behind the ears. The group sat there for a while, eating their respective foods. To Survivor's relief, Hunter seemed to get at least a tidbit more healthy while he was eating. When he was satisfied, his eyes weren't as foggy as they were, and he seemed strong enough to stand on his own. "All right, I think we're about ready to keep moving," Artificer eventually said, getting to her feet. "You feeling better, Hunter?" she asked, reaching a paw out to help him up. Hunter grunted as he was pulled to his feet, still seeming a bit unbalanced, but that was probably more due to not standing much this cycle. "Yeah, way better," he said, cracking the joints in his neck. "Guess I'll live for a bit longer after all." He chuckled and said, "Thank you, both of you." Survivor chirped, pulling him into a hug, while Artificer chuckled. "Didn't feel like carrying you around for the whole duration of the cycle, you know," she said jokingly. Hunter blushed and hid his face in Survivor's fur as his mate giggled, patting him on the back. After Hunter's blush disappeared, he backed out of the embrace. Artificer stepped up to him and held out a spear. He took it gratefully and strapped it to his back. Glimmer climbed back up on Survivor's shoulder. "Right, so, we keep going up?" Hunter asked. In response, the Overseer popped out of the nearest wall, showing them an arrow pointing up. Artificer scoffed and rolled her eyes, grabbing onto the pole and moving up. Survivor followed, with Hunter close behind. They kept moving forward, pole after pole, predator after predator, and pipe after pipe. As they're about to pass through another pipe, Artificer suddenly stops, her ear twitching as she glances behind her. "Did you hear that?" she asks, her ears rotating as if trying to tune into some far-off noises. "Hear what?" Hunter responds, dropping into a combat stance, spear at the ready. "Scavs," Artificer whispers as she moves into a combat stance as well. "Keep moving, I'll make sure they don't ambush us." She says this, creeping forward to a nearby ledge and peering down. Hunter seems ready to argue, but Survivor simply nods and pulls him along, both going through the pipe. On the other side, Hunter gives him a glare, while Survivor just shrugs. Once she sets her mind to something, it'll be impossible to convince her to do the opposite. Survivor says simply, walking forward. His mate sighs, seeming to agree with Survivor's point before moving to follow the white slug cat. The room contained two different pipes, one straight ahead and another in the ceiling. The overseer helpfully popped out of the ground and pointed them towards the one in the ceiling. Survivor hops up and climbs a pole. He's preparing to climb through the pipe when he hears it. A wet, squishy sound, like someone mixed several crushed bluefruits together in a bowl and stirred the contents. He stills, looking towards the source, the other pipe. Hunter hears it too, pulling his spear off his back and staring at the pipe in anticipation. Survivor held his breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a blue tentacle burst through the pipe, feeling around the ground blindly. It was very long, almost reaching Hunter before stopping right in front of his feet. He yelped. Not ready for the new enemy to appear, he threw his spear, which was embedded in the tentacle. The tentacle writhed for a moment and fell still. After a moment, something else came through the pipe, and Survivor saw Hunter freeze up in fear. It was a big ball of what looked like several of the same lumps that Hunter had growing on his back. It had several more tentacles coming out of its core, all feeling around the room blindly. Survivor gasped, and the blue lumps of the giant creature emitted a sort of particle as it started crawling forward. It was so huge that it almost couldn't move through the room, getting wedged in the corridor. Hunter jumped up and grabbed onto the pole, panically scrambling up it. Unfortunately, the sounds this made alerted the creature to his presence. Survivor screamed in horror as its closest tentacle reached out, grabbed a hold of Hunter's leg, and pulled.